The day I introduced his two wives to each other, he walked into that room, believing he was about to manage the situation. He walked in with the specific confidence of a man who had been managing two lives for 9 years and had never once been caught. He looked at me. He looked at the woman standing next to me. And for the first time in 9 years, I watched that confidence leave his face completely. My name is Laura. And the man who thought he had two separate lives found out they were the same one. And both of us had been done with him for longer than he knew. I need to take you back, all the way back, because a story like this doesn't start with the discovery. It starts much earlier, in the small things that you explain away, because you love someone, and because the explanation is easier than the alternative. And it ends not with rage, though rage was available, but with something more precise and more permanent than rage. It ends with two women standing in a room, and a man finally running out of explanations. I grew up in Richmond, Virginia, the oldest of 3 children, in a family that was ordinary, in the best sense of the word. My father managed a hardware store. My mother was a dental hygienist. We had dinner together every night. We took 1 vacation a year to the same lake house in the Blue Ridge Mountains. We were not wealthy, and we were not dramatic, and I loved my life with the comfortable, unexamined love of someone who has never had a reason to question it. That love, the love of something stable and unhidden, was what I brought to my marriage. It was also, I understand now, what made me a particular kind of target. His name was Michael Calloway. That was the name he used with me. We met when I was 29, at a professional conference in Washington, D.C. He was 42, confident and articulate, and very good at the specific skill of making a person feel fully seen, asking the right questions, remembering the answers, circling back to things you'd mentioned in passing, in a way that made you feel like you were the only person in his attention. We dated for 14 months. He traveled a great deal for work, which I knew from the beginning, and which was explained in terms that were reasonable. Client sites in multiple cities, a job that required mobility, the ordinary demands of a career at his level. I had my own career and my own life, and I was not a person who needed constant presence. He was in Richmond reliably every weekend. He called every evening when he was away. He was, to all visible appearances, a man who had organized his life to include me as fully as his schedule allowed. We married when I was 31. A small wedding. He said he wasn't a big wedding person, which I found endearing. His family at the ceremony was limited to a brother who flew in from Seattle and an elderly aunt who didn't speak much. He explained that his parents were gone and that he had never been close to extended family. I brought 20 people from my family and my life. He brought 3. I told myself that was fine. I told myself that what he lacked in family connections, he made up for in the quality of his attention to me. We bought a house in the Fan District in Richmond, a beautiful old row house that I loved immediately, with high ceilings and original floors, and a garden in the back. A garden that I spent 3 weekends a year making into something I was proud of. We had a life. I worked. He traveled. He came home on weekends. We had friends we saw regularly. We had routines that felt, from the inside, like the architecture of a real marriage. What we didn't have, I understood in year 3, was children. I had wanted children. Michael had said he wanted children, but the timing was always slightly off. A big project, a period of travel intensity, a moment that wasn't quite right. In year 3, I stopped waiting for the right moment, and I said I wanted to start trying now. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said he thought we should talk about timing. We talked. Nothing changed. In year 4, I asked him directly whether he actually wanted children. He said of course he did. Nothing changed. I noted that I didn't push as hard as I might have. I was busy with my career, which was going well, and I told myself that his ambivalence about timing was the normal ambivalence of a busy man, not a signal about something deeper. The signal, when I finally saw it, didn't come from anything I was looking for. It came from a parking ticket. In year 6 of our marriage, Michael left his jacket on the chair in the bedroom before a shower, and his phone slipped out of the pocket. When I picked it up to put it on the dresser, a notification appeared on the screen. Not a message. A parking violation notification from an app connected to a vehicle I didn't recognize. A different car than either of the two we owned. Registered in a city 3 hours away. Charlotte, North Carolina. I put the phone on the dresser. I went to the kitchen. I made coffee. And I thought about the parking notification. For a long time, I want to be honest about what I did next. I did not immediately begin investigating. I spent 2 weeks in a state that I can only describe as suspended, going about my ordinary life, going to work, making dinner, sleeping beside my husband, carrying what I had seen without acting on it, because acting on it meant accepting what it might mean. That 2-week suspension was its own kind of cost, and I want to name it, because I think it's something many people have experienced and rarely talk about, the specific difficulty of the moment. Before you decide to know, I decided to know on a Sunday afternoon when Michael was traveling, and I was sitting in the garden. I had spent 3 weekends a year making into something beautiful, and I thought, he has never once helped me with this garden. In 9 years, he had been here. He had sat in it. He had said it was lovely. He had never once picked up a tool, or pulled a weed, or asked what needed planting. I sat there thinking about that, and I understood that it was a small thing, and also that it was the shape of everything. I called a private investigator the following Monday. Her name was Jean Barker, and she had been recommended to me by a colleague who had used her in a business fraud matter. I told Jean what I had seen and what I suspected. She asked me what I wanted to know. I told her I wanted to know everything. Jean called me back in 3 weeks. She asked if she could come to my office. Rather than discuss it on the phone, I told her to come. She sat across from me, and she put a folder on my desk. And she said, "Laura, I need you to be ready for this." I told her I was ready. His name in Charlotte was Mark Harmon. Not Michael Calloway. Mark Harmon. He had a house in a suburb called Ballantyne, a 4-bedroom colonial, with a 2-car garage and a backyard swing set. He had a wife whose name was Diane, and who was 38 years old, and who worked as an elementary school teacher. He had 2 children, a daughter named Sophie, who was 7, a son named Ethan, who was 5. Sophie was born in year 2 of our marriage. Ethan was born in year 4. The years when Michael had told me the timing wasn't right for children. He was already a father. Twice. I sat with that for a long moment. Jean was quiet across the desk, giving me the time she understood I needed. I looked at the photographs in the folder. The house in Ballantyne. Michael getting out of the car I didn't recognize. Michael at what appeared to be a child's birthday party, with a little girl on his shoulders, and a woman standing next to him, who looked, from the outside, like someone's perfectly happy wife. I asked Jean how long. She said from what she could establish, Mark Harmon had existed for at least 9 years. The house in Charlotte had been purchased approximately 8 months before Michael Calloway had asked me to marry him. He had built the second life first. He had built it. And then he had come to Washington, D.C., and met me at a conference, and decided to add a first life on top of it. I closed the folder. I thanked Jean. I asked her to continue the investigation for another 2 weeks, and to document everything she could. That evening, Michael called from Charlotte. From a client site in Charlotte, he said, and asked how my day was. I told him it was fine. I asked about his. He described it in the familiar detail of someone who has been constructing plausible accounts of their days for years. I listened to every word. I said goodnight. I hung up, and I started planning. Now I need to stop right here, because what I did over the following 8 weeks, and the decision I made about Diane, that changed everything, is the part of this story that no one, including Michael, saw coming. If you haven't subscribed to US Story Nation yet, hit that button right now and ring that bell. Because what I built in those 8 weeks required the two most important things I have ever done in my life, and I did them in the right order. The first thing I did was call my attorney. Margaret Osei had handled the purchase of our Richmond house, and I trusted her completely. I met with her on a Tuesday morning, and I put Jean's folder on her desk, and I told her everything. Margaret was quiet through all of it. When I finished, she said, "This is bigamy." I said, "I know." She said, "Under Virginia law, bigamy is a criminal offense." I said, "I know that too." She said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "I want to understand my options completely before I do anything." Margaret spent 2 hours walking me through my options. The legal landscape was complex. A criminal complaint for bigamy was available, but would take time, and the outcome was uncertain. The divorce was more immediately actionable, and the financial picture of our marriage, the house, the accounts, the assets accumulated over 9 years, was something that could be addressed through civil proceedings. What complicated things, Margaret said carefully, was that Michael's financial arrangements across 2 households were going to require investigation that went beyond what Jean had found. I asked Margaret what she meant. She explained that a man maintaining 2 complete households, 2 mortgages, 2 sets of household expenses, 2 lives, was either earning significantly more than the income he had disclosed to me, or was managing the finances in ways that were worth examining closely. I told her to examine them. Margaret brought in a forensic accountant named Robert Chen, who spent 3 weeks going through everything they could access. What Robert found was not simple. There were accounts I had not known about. There was income from the consulting firm that had not been fully disclosed. In our joint financial picture, there were certain arrangements in the way the Charlotte house was financed that raised questions Robert described as requiring further investigation. Robert's report became the second folder on Margaret's desk, alongside Jean's surveillance. It told a story that was complete enough to act on. The second thing I did was contact Diane. I want to tell you how I made that decision, because it was the hardest and most important decision of those 8 weeks. Easier choices were available to me. I could have filed for divorce without ever involving Diane. I could have pursued my own legal remedies and left her to find out on her own timeline. There was a version of this story where I protected myself and left Diane's world to collapse without my involvement. I chose a different version, not because I owed Diane anything, because I was the person who had found out first, because I had the information and the documentation and the professional support. And Diane had a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old and a marriage she believed was real. Because if our positions were reversed, if Diane had found out first and had chosen to protect herself without telling me, I would have spent years wishing someone had told me before it had cost me more than it already had. I found Diane's contact information through Jean. I called her on a Wednesday evening when, according to Jean's schedule documentation, Michael was in Richmond with me. She answered on the 3rd ring. I told her my name. I told her I was calling about her husband, and I told her his name in Richmond was not the name she knew. She didn't say anything for a long moment, and then she said, "Who are you?" I told her. She was quiet for longer this time. Then she said, "How long have you known?" I told her 8 weeks. She said, "How long has this been happening?" I told her what Jean had found. She was quiet for a while after that, and I let her be quiet, and I waited. She said, "I need to meet you." We met the following Saturday in Charlotte, in a hotel lobby that was neutral ground for both of us. I brought Margaret. Diane brought her own attorney, a woman named Patricia, who was experienced and direct. We sat at a table in the lobby, and I gave Diane Jean's folder, and I watched her go through it, the way I had gone through it 3 weeks earlier, the same progression across her face, the same moments of stopping and going back and stopping again. When she put the folder down, she looked at me and she said, "How are you this calm?" I told her I had had 8 more weeks with it than she had. She said she didn't know if she was ever going to be calm about it. I told her I understood that. We talked for 3 hours. Not about Michael. We spent very little time talking about him. We talked about our situations, our legal positions, what each of us needed, how the financial picture affected Diane differently than it affected me, because she had 2 young children, and a teaching salary, and a mortgage on a house, financed in ways Robert had flagged. Margaret and Patricia talked about the coordinated legal approach that would serve both of us better than 2 separate proceedings. At the end of 3 hours, Diane looked at me and said, "Why did you call me?" I told her what I had told myself, that she was in the same position I had been in 8 weeks earlier, without the information, in that I had the choice of giving it to her or not giving it to her, and that I couldn't justify not giving it to her. She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "Thank you." Just that. Thank you. Michael came home to Richmond the following Thursday. He put his bag down in the hallway, and he came into the kitchen, where I was making dinner. He said something ordinary about traffic on 95, and I said, "There's someone I'd like you to meet." I had asked Diane if she wanted to be there. She had said yes without hesitating. She was in the living room. She had driven up from Charlotte that morning. She was sitting in the chair by the window, the chair Michael usually sat in when he was watching television, and when he came through the kitchen doorway and saw her, his face did something I will never forget. Not guilt. Exactly. Something more fundamental than guilt. The expression of a man who has built the architecture of his life on the certainty that 2 things will never be in the same room, and who is now standing in that room. He said Diane's name, her real name, the name that was his wife's name in Charlotte. He said it in a voice I had never heard from him before. Diane looked at him, and she didn't say anything. I said, "I think you know why she's here." He tried. I will give him that. He tried several different versions of explanation and denial and reframing in the 15 minutes that followed, and each one ran out faster than the previous one, because Diane and I were sitting there with folders on our laps and attorneys on speed dial and 9 years of documented evidence between us, and there was simply nothing left to say that hadn't already been answered. Margaret served him with the divorce papers. That evening, Diane's attorney had filed in North Carolina. The same day, the bigamy complaint was filed with the Richmond Commonwealth's Attorney's Office. The following Monday, the bigamy charge was prosecuted. Michael pleaded to a reduced charge after negotiation and received a suspended sentence with probation, which was not the outcome I would have chosen, but which Margaret told me was within the normal range for a first offense, and which produced a permanent criminal record that I considered the more important outcome. The civil divorce proceedings in Virginia produced a settlement that reflected 9 years of marriage and the financial investigation Robert had conducted. The Charlotte proceedings produced a separate settlement that reflected the children, the mortgage, and the financial documentation that had been assembled there. Robert's work and the coordinated approach that Margaret and Patricia took meant that the financial picture was examined completely, rather than in the partial way it would have been if Diane and I had proceeded separately. That completeness mattered. It produced a result that neither of us would have achieved alone. Michael lost both houses. He lost both marriages. He lost the consulting firm, which the financial investigation had revealed was structured in ways that did not survive legal scrutiny. He is, as far as I know, living in an apartment in Charlotte, not near Ballantyne, not near his children. His children see him on a schedule that Diane controls and that her attorney constructed carefully. Sophie is 9 now. Ethan is 7. They are, from what Diane has told me, resilient in the way that children are resilient when their remaining parent is steady and present and honest with them about difficult things in age-appropriate ways. Diane is all of those things. I know this because Diane and I still talk. This is the part of the story that surprises people. Diane and I are friends, not close in the way of people who have chosen each other freely. We were brought together by circumstances neither of us would have chosen, but real, in the way of people who have been through something significant together and who understand each other in ways that are specific to that experience. We text occasionally. We have had dinner twice. She came to Richmond last spring, and we walked through the Fan District and ate at a restaurant I love and talked about our lives in the way of people whose lives are genuinely different now from what they were. I am not going to pretend that what happened to me did not cost me something. It cost me 9 years and a marriage I had built in good faith and a version of my future that I had believed in. Those are real losses, and I am not going to dress them up as gifts. What I will tell you is that what I built in the 8 weeks after Jean put that folder on my desk, the documentation, the legal preparation, the decision to call Diane gave me back something that 9 years of being deceived had quietly taken. It gave me back my own judgment, my trust in what I saw and what I knew, the confidence of someone who looked at a situation clearly and handled it precisely, and stood in a living room with another woman beside me and watched a man run out of explanations. He had 2 lives. He thought they were separate. The most important thing I ever did was make them the same one. If you are in something that doesn't add up, if there are explanations that are always plausible and never quite satisfying, trust that feeling, not because it's always what you fear, but because you deserve to know what is actually true about your own life. And the person who has the most interest in you not knowing is the person who benefits from your not knowing. You deserve to know, and you deserve to handle what you find with exactly as much precision and patience and care as it requires. Tell me in the comments if you have ever trusted your instincts about someone and found out you were right.
Subscribe to US Story Nation for more stories. I'll see you in the next one.